Saloon hadn't heard silence in 12 years. Not real silence. Not the kind that stretched, weightless, and endless, like the void beyond a viewport. Not this calm, ship-humming quiet that made her ears ache and her pulse uncertain. For years, silence had meant something else, the seconds before command, the breath before pain, the stillness before they took something from her again. But here, on the Aegis, it meant nothing. Or perhaps everything. The door hissed shut behind her with a soft mechanical sigh. She stood just inside the small chamber, the first room she'd ever been given that hadn't required obedience to enter. It was sterile, utilitarian, bathed in low amber light. A folded blanket rested at the edge of a narrow cot. A sealed meal packet sat on a metal tray. The air smelled of ionized steel and aged plastic. Not blood, not fear. That alone felt like fiction. She didn't move. Her feet, bare, purple against the silver-gray floor, remained where Merrick had left her. The human. The man with steel in his shoulders and dusk in his voice. The man who had, for reasons she couldn't understand, pulled her out of the hellhole on Nargith 3 and brought her here. He hadn't touched her when he lifted her from the syndicate cargo cell. Hadn't spoken much, even on the 3-day jump to the outer rim. But he'd looked at her, and not like they used to. He'd looked at her like she was something broken he couldn't quite put back together, but couldn't throw away either. Saloon turned her head slowly, scanning the room. No surveillance panel. No restraints. No command prompt. She took a shallow breath. Still, she didn't step forward. The ship's soft hum vibrated under her toes. The Aegis, a retired patrol vessel turned private salvage craft, was old, underpowered, and running on patch code. But it was quiet. It was his. And for now, it was hers too. She moved at last one step, then another. The cot's edge met the backs of her knees, and she sat slowly, her limbs stiff from too many days curled in corners too small to stand. Merrick had given her water, food, bandages. He hadn't asked questions, but she had them all the same. Who was he? Why her? And why now? Her fingers curled around the corner of the blanket, unsure if she had permission to use it. Her skin, lavender-hued, soft and shimmering beneath the dim lights, still bore the faint lines where shackles once clung. The Syndic had preferred metal woven with neural fire, pulses that punished disobedience with hallucination and heat. You learn to stop wanting things, she thought, even warmth. Her eyes flicked toward the corner of the room where a faint orange panel blinked, indicating air quality. Safe. Clean. Breathing didn't hurt anymore. Her throat did. She hadn't spoken a word since Merrick found her. Maybe she couldn't anymore. Maybe the words had calcified in her chest after too many years of silence. Her name wasn't Saloon when they took her. She had given them that name later, after they'd erased the first one. The Syndic had purchased her in a silent trade with the Arlen Dominion, where she'd once lived in the water-templed cities of Kelthera. She remembered salt on her skin. She remembered silver moons and woven songs. Now, her voice trembled even in thought. A shiver rippled through her. The room was warm, but her memories were not. She closed her eyes in soft flashes, a collar being fastened, a language stripped away, the way they'd laughed when she refused to dance, the sting of electric batons, hands that didn't ask, only took. She forced the visions back. Breathe. Breathe like she used to before they took her. She opened her eyes again, and there, just outside the closed door, she heard footsteps. Heavy, measured. Merrick. She could picture him, tall, broad-shouldered, his black uniform jacket torn at one sleeve, revealing a scar that curved down his forearm like a story someone tried to erase. His face was sun-worn, jaw lined with gray stubble, but his eyes, those eyes. She hadn't known humans could look so cold and so careful at the same time. She'd seen him glance her way more than once during the jump. Not like a man assessing something useful. Not even like a man afraid of what she might be. No, Merrick looked at her like she was a question that mattered. Why? Why did he care? And why hadn't he touched her? Not even once. Not when he carried her aboard. Not when she coughed up blood in the med bay. Not when he wrapped the gauze around her wrist. She thought she'd forgotten what desire was. But now, The question curled low in her stomach, hot and unwanted. What if he wanted to? What if he saw her and wanted not power, but permission? The idea alone nearly shattered her. She stood abruptly, moving toward the tray. The meal packet was standard military ration, synthetic, protein-heavy, bland. She picked it up, hands shaking. The warmth from it stung her palms. Hunger clawed at her belly. She hadn't eaten in nearly 40 hours, but her body still flinched as she raised it to her mouth. They used to make me beg. For this. For crumbs. The first bite was mechanical. The second hit something else. Her throat constricted. Her shoulders hunched. A sound caught in her chest. Not a sob, not quite, but close. Her body remembered how to cry, even if her mind resisted. She didn't want to cry in front of him, but he wasn't watching. No one was. She was alone. And for the first time in years, that wasn't a threat. The tears came silently, trailing along the curve of her jaw like rain against old glass. She didn't sob, didn't wail, just let it happen. After a while, the tray slid from her lap. She curled into the corner of the cot, facing the wall. Her hair, long, cobalt blue and still tangled, fell across her shoulder like a curtain. She didn't brush it away. Sleep didn't come quickly, but it came. And just before it did, as the room dimmed further into rest mode, a sound echoed down the corridor. Click. A door locking. Not hers. Far away. Not loud, but too familiar. Saloon's eyes opened. Her pulse stuttered. It's nothing, she told herself. But her mind filled the silence with memory. The rhythmic clank of chains. The sound of metal teeth biting closed. She didn't move. Didn't sit up. But her breath held itself still in her chest. Because what if the danger wasn't over? What if it had only just begun? And what if the man with the storm-gray eyes wasn't just her savior, but something else entirely? Saloon woke to the sound of her own breath, quiet, controlled, almost too still. It took her a moment to remember where she was. No restraints. No darkness thick with the scent of oil and fear. No sharp-edged orders barked in an unfamiliar tongue. Just the soft vibration of the aegis beneath her, steady like a distant heartbeat. Faint light glowed behind her closed eyelids, signaling the ship's morning cycle. Her body remained curled on the narrow cot, arms drawn close to her chest. Her long blue hair had tangled during the night, curling around her shoulders like strands of kelp in deep water. For a long while, she didn't move, just listened. Nothing. The corridor outside was silent. The door hadn't opened. No one had entered while she slept. That alone unsettled her more than she'd expected. Saloon sat up slowly, blankets slipping from her shoulders. The memory of the previous night clung to her. The faint click of a door locking somewhere far down the hall. It hadn't been hers, and yet her heart had heard it as if it was. Her body remembered the rhythm of that sound too well. She'd spent years reacting to it, preparing for the things that always came next. But nothing had come, just silence. Still, the unease lingered like a whisper in the air. She rose to her feet, pausing as a dull ache bloomed through her legs. Her muscles weren't used to softness. The cot had been more generous than any sleeping surface she'd had in years. It would take her body time to relearn what comfort felt like. The room was still as she crossed it, barefoot again, drawn toward the door. She stood in front of it, unsure if it would open for her or not. It did, without hesitation. It slid aside with a quiet hydraulic sigh, revealing a narrow corridor washed in dim, directional lighting. Metal grates underfoot, pipes running along the ceiling. The scent of recycled air, warm wiring, and the faint trace of human sweat. She stepped out. The ship had a shape to it, an old Federation military patrol layout, modified by someone who preferred minimalism over aesthetics. The Aegis wasn't elegant, but it was functional, practical, like Merrick himself. Saloon padded silently down the hall, senses wide open. A soft beeping echoed from deeper in the ship. Not an alarm, just a system ping. A maintenance notification, maybe. She didn't know how she knew that, but she did. The years she'd spent on ships, some as cargo, some as property, had given her an instinct for machinery and its moods. As she turned the corner toward the galley, she stopped. Merrick was there. He stood near a wall panel, One hand braced against the metal, the other wrapped around a steaming mug. He looked tired. His dark hair was tousled, jaw rough with stubble. His face was sharp-edged in the morning light, all planes and shadows, but it wasn't the ruggedness that made her chest tighten. It was the scar, a pale, jagged line that ran from his temple to just beneath his left ear. It wasn't fresh, but it hadn't faded entirely. It made him look like someone who'd been broken once and had kept walking anyway. He noticed her before she could back away. His eyes, steel gray and unreadable, met hers. But he didn't flinch, didn't stiffen. He simply straightened, lowered the mug, and spoke. "You slept." It wasn't a question, but there was something gentle in the way he said it, as if sleep itself was a triumph. Selun didn't answer. Her voice wasn't ready yet. She watched him instead, waiting for the other sentence. The command. The explanation. But none came. "I figured you'd be hungry again," he said after a moment. He nodded toward the table, where a ration pouch and 2 metal utensils waited beside a fresh cup of water. Her eyes lingered on it. The part of her that still wore invisible shackles hesitated. The instinct to wait, to be told, to be ordered, fought with something quieter. Merrick didn't tell her to sit. He just stepped back and gave her space. Selun moved forward, slow but deliberate. She sat, picked up the pouch. Her hand shook slightly as she unsealed it. The smell was plain but warm, vegetable starch, synthetic grains. No mold, no spoil meat, no chemicals to numb the senses. She ate in silence, slowly this time. Merrick leaned against the bulkhead across from her, arms crossed. He said nothing, just watched with a stillness that wasn't tense, only observant. After a long while, she cleared her throat. It was a dry, uncertain sound. He glanced up. "I heard something," she said. It was the first time he'd heard her voice. It was low and smooth, slightly hoarse, like a blade drawn from a long-forgotten sheath. He didn't interrupt. "Last night, a door. Locking." He nodded once. "Maintenance bay. The outer hatch locks automatically during recharge cycles. Sound carries through the deck. Not a threat, not a signal, just a ship doing its job." Selun looked down at her hands, folded neatly in her lap. He hesitated before speaking again. "You don't have to stay if you don't want to. You're not trapped here." She didn't respond right away. Trapped. The word echoed like a ghost. She'd been trapped in places that didn't need doors or walls to hold her. She could be standing in an open field under 5 moons and still feel the weight of invisible chains. "This ship," she asked quietly, "you're alone on it?" He nodded. "By choice." That made her look up. Something flickered in his expression, some memory or truth he didn't want to explain. "Why did you take me?" she asked. Her voice didn't tremble. It was the most solid thing in the room. He didn't answer right away. "There was no plan," he said finally. "The station was collapsing. I went in for salvage. Found you instead." She tilted her head. "You could have left me." "I didn't." That was all he offered. No justification. No moral high ground. Selun let the silence settle between them again. It was a different kind of silence this time. Not the empty hush of a holding cell. Not the sharp stillness before punishment. This was something else. Something open. But then the console behind Merrick chirped. His head turned toward it. One brow furrowed. "What is it?" she asked. "Proximity alert," he muttered. She stood slowly. Her pulse quickened. He moved to the console and tapped in a sequence. The display flickered. A pale green light pulsed on the screen. "No signature. No broadcast ID," he said. "But it's close." How close? Too close for comfort. Selun's breath caught. She didn't know if this was normal or not, if ships just appeared sometimes like ghosts in the dark. But Marek's jaw had tightened. "Stay here," he said. She didn't. She followed him. Not because she trusted him, but because for the first time in over a decade, she wanted to choose who she followed. And for reasons she couldn't name, she didn't want to be left behind. Not by him. Not now. The Aegis trembled with a sound so soft it could have been mistaken for the groan of old metal cooling in space. But Selun felt it differently. It moved through her like a warning, like a vibration only her instincts knew how to read. Her spine straightened, muscles tightening in response. Merrick was already moving before the ship stilled. She followed him without question. Not because she had to, but because something in her had started trusting the way he moved through danger. Quiet, steady, efficient. He tapped the panel beside the navigation hub, eyes locked on the flickering display. No words yet, just numbers, lights, and a green pulse on the edge of the proximity grid that didn't belong there. Salun stayed back, a few paces behind, watching, reading him. Unidentified vessel. No signature. No comms. Just drift, he muttered. But even as he said it, his fingers sped up, typing commands, recalibrating scans. Could it be Syndic? She asked. Merritt didn't answer right away. He wasn't a man who wasted breath on guesswork. But his jaw shifted. That told her enough. It could be, he finally said. Or worse, someone who wants us to think they're Syndic. Salun stepped closer to the console. She studied the movement of the ship on the display. Its trajectory wasn't random. It was calculated. It was shadowing the Aegis at a distance just shy of aggression. They're watching us, she said. Waiting. Merrick nodded once. They haven't locked weapons. They haven't hailed. But they've seen us. A chill slipped down her arms. It wasn't the ship's recycled air. I know that silence, she said, softer now. It's the kind that comes before they take. Merrick glanced at her, really looked. She didn't flinch from his gaze. Then he moved, quick, practiced, locked down outer airlocks, routed non-essential power to shields, activated sensor scramblers, all without panic, but with the urgency of someone who'd been in too many close calls and survived them all by inches. Salun stood beside him, pulse in her ears. What's the plan? She asked. If they close in, we run dark, he said. If they dock, we fight. Their eyes met again. The understanding between them needed no explanation. There was no room left for fear, only choice. But a thought tightened her gut. What if they're not here for you? She said. What if they're here for me? Marek's hand stilled. Then we make sure they regret it. Before she could respond, the ship's proximity alarms flashed again. The screen pulsed red, docking clamps engaged. Marek's eyes narrowed. They're locking on. Salun didn't hesitate. Mid-deck airlocks, the weakest point. That's where they'll breach. You're sure? I lived in ships like theirs, she said. I know their tactics. He handed her a weapon without asking if she knew how to use it. She took it with a confidence that surprised even her. They moved fast, side by side, through the narrow corridors of the Aegis. Metal walls flashed past in a blur. The ship groaned again, this time deeper, pressure shifting. Their enemies weren't just near. They were coming in. At the mid-deck, Merrick sealed the bulkhead behind them. He crouched beside a control panel while Salun positioned herself near the entry junction, her back to the wall, weapon raised. 3 hostiles minimum, Merrick said. Could be more. The airlock hissed. She closed her eyes for half a heartbeat. Not to pray, but to remember. Chains, collars, hands that didn't ask, doors that opened like jaws. But this wasn't then. She was armed, and she wasn't alone. The first intruder stepped through, fully armored, faceless. A merc, by the look of his gear. He raised his weapon, but Salun fired first. Her shot was clean, sharp, right between the plates of his armor. He collapsed with a short grunt. 2 more followed. Merrick took one down with 2 sharp bursts of plasma fire. The third raised a rifle, but hesitated. His visor lifted, and Salun froze. That face, older, scarred, but those eyes, that voice. Well, he drawled. They said you're dead. I told them no. She's too pretty to die. It was him, the handler, the one who'd taught her obedience like a game, the one who called her mirror like it was a joke. Her hands trembled once, then steadied. She shot him through the chest. His body dropped. No words, no legacy, just silence. She stood frozen for a breath. Then Marek's hand was on her shoulder. You all right? She nodded. I'm better than all right. More thuds echoed from deeper in the ship. Merrick swore under his breath. We need to move. They'll try the maintenance hatch next. He turned, expecting her to follow. She didn't hesitate. They ran together, down toward the emergency shaft, the light flickering overhead as the ship shook from another breach attempt. Is the shuttle operational? She asked. Yes. Then we use it. He looked at her as they ran. You're thinking bait. We launch it with a false signal. Make them chase a ghost. While we double back, cut power, mask the real Aegis. He didn't argue. They reached the lower bay. Saloon was already at the terminal, typing faster than he expected. How do you know how to do this? He asked. She glanced at him, eyes hard. They trained me to be sold to command. The shuttle fired seconds later, a decoy signal pulsing from its underbelly like a dying distress call. It veered sharply, drifting toward the fringe of space. Merrick pulled up the sensor feed. The enemy ship took the bait. Saloon stepped back from the console. Her chest rose and fell with shallow, controlled breaths. She turned toward him. I didn't just survive them, she said. I learned them. I became what they feared. He didn't look away. And now, he asked. She stepped closer. Now I'm free. And I'm angry. Merrick studied her, then nodded. Good. That means we're not running anymore. She tilted her head. What are we doing then? He smiled just a little. A dangerous smile. We're hunting. Outside, the shuttle vanished into the darkness. Inside the Aegis, the silence had changed. It no longer belonged to the ones chasing them. Now it was theirs. The cryo-hold was cold in a way that seeped into bone, sterile, metallic, ageless. Saloon stood near the rows of dormant stasis pods while Merrick worked on isolating the ship's tracking signal. The air felt too still, too quiet, like the room itself had been waiting for something, someone, to awaken it again. She traced her fingers along the frame of a sealed pod, where frost bloomed in delicate patterns across its glass. A faint outline of something once living still lingered beneath the surface, a reminder of whoever had been here before. Did you ever think, she said quietly, that maybe some places remember the people they lose? Merrick didn't look up from the console. I don't think places remember. I think people make them haunted. She nodded, absorbing the weight in his voice. I've never had a place, she admitted. Not one that stayed. That made him pause. He turned, resting his palms on the console's edge. Where are you from, Saloon? The question hung in the air for a long time. No longer because she couldn't answer, but because she could. I was born on Kelthera, she said. An ocean world, mostly archipelagos and deep-water cities. My people are called the Thalathari. We lived in temple cities carved from the reef cliffs, sang memory cycles, guided tides. We weren't warriors, but we remembered everything. Merrick studied her with quiet intensity. Like each word she spoke fit into a puzzle he'd been trying to solve. They feared that, she continued. Not just what we knew, but what we could do. He stepped forward slightly. What could you do? Saloon exhaled slowly. Thalathari aren't telepaths. Not exactly. But we can feel, reflect, amplify emotions, intentions, even truths buried under silence. We could sing into someone's pain and show them what they were hiding from themselves. That was our gift. Sound more like a curse in the wrong hands. It became one. Her eyes darkened. When the Syndic came, they didn't attack. They came as friends, trade delegates. We welcomed them. They observed our ceremonies, asked us questions, then disappeared. 3 weeks later, they returned in the night. No banners, no lights, just silence. She looked down at the frost-lace pod. I was 13. My mother was a diplomat. They took us both. Said we were rare. Said we would fetch more than the usual stock. They killed her in the second cycle when she tried to resist a neural imprint collar. Merrick didn't speak. He didn't have to. The silence between them was full of meaning. They gave me a name, Unit 41. But one of the handlers, he called me the Mirror, said it was funny how people got uncomfortable when I looked at them for too long. Her hands tightened into fists. They experimented on us, tried to see if they could weaponize what we were. Forced emotional triggers bonded us to unwilling buyers. When that didn't work, they started suppressing it with injectables. Dull the senses, dull the memory. But you can't erase what we are. Merrick stepped closer. That's why they marked you. She nodded. They couldn't control me, but they wanted to track me. I think they were preparing for an auction when the station went dark. That's when you found me. And brought you here, he said. She looked at him. Why? Merrick hesitated. I was stationed on Athros 6 during the 5th border conflict. It was supposed to be a political standoff, just a show of force. But we all knew something was wrong. He ran a hand over his face, his voice hardening. Near our base was a freight line. Unmarked ships moved through every few days. No insignias, no manifests. I asked my CEO about them once. He said they were classified Federation assets, that I didn't want to know. He laughed bitterly. He was right. Saloon waited. One day, I saw them unload a group of people. Not soldiers, not prisoners of war. Civilians. Small ones. Kids. They marched them across the tarmac in silence like crates of equipment. I wanted to stop it. I didn't. Why? She asked. Because I was a coward, he said without flinching. Because I was following orders. Because I thought if I asked too many questions, I'd disappear too. He turned away, fists clenched at his sides. I transferred out 6 months later. Couldn't take it anymore. Told myself I was done. But it doesn't go away. That's silence. That moment when you could have done something and didn't. He looked at her then, eyes colder than she'd ever seen them. Less from anger, more from memory. So, I started listening for the silences, he said. The signals that didn't make noise. The stories that didn't make reports. And I went after them. Alone, she asked. Always. Saloon studied him. Not as a rescuer, but as a man unraveling in front of her. His wounds didn't show on his skin. They lived in the lines around his mouth, in the grit of his voice, in the heavy quiet he wore like armor. You saved me, she said. But it wasn't about me, was it? Merrick shook his head. It was about not failing someone again. She stepped closer, stopping just an arm's length away. Well, you didn't. The air between them tightened. Not tense, charged. She could feel something shifting. The distrust was gone, replaced not by comfort, but by recognition. Two people broken in different ways, finding in each other the missing parts they hadn't known how to carry alone. He looked at her, really looked. You're not what they said you were, he murmured. No, she said, but I was. And that's what scares them. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was filled with all the things they didn't have to say. Then a sharp ping echoed from the console. Proximity breach alert. Merrick moved instantly, pulling up the feed. Third team. Back vent shaft. Saloon didn't hesitate. We use the shuttle now. He nodded. Split the signal. Reverse broadcast a distress call. Pulse it from the shuttle's transponder. They'll think we bailed and follow it. He began programming it. She moved to the backup generator and rerouted the ship's internal power grid, her fingers quick and certain. He noticed. You've done this before, he said. She gave a faint smile. They trained me. I paid attention. The transponder lit green. Shuttle's ready, Merrick said. Signals pulsing. We'll move to the decoy corridor and double back once they engage. They moved quickly. As they ran, Saloon thought of the girl she used to be. The one in the collar. The one who sang in secret at night. Not for comfort, but to remember who she was. She was not that girl anymore. She was still Thalathari. Still alive. Still dangerous. And finally, for the first time since her capture, finally free to fight back. And this time, she wasn't alone. The enemy ship was gone, chasing ghosts through black space. The Aegis drifted in its wake, silent, cloaked alive. The lights were dimmed to a warm, amber glow. The hum of the engines had quieted to a lullaby. Every bulkhead was sealed, every breath steady, and yet Saloon's pulse was anything but calm. She sat on the edge of Marek's bunk, knees drawn up, blanket draped over her shoulders like a shield of softness. The fabric held his scent, clean metal, worn leather, something sharp and earthy beneath. A smell that no longer made her flinch. Merrick moved around the room in slow silence, running a diagnostic from the wall console. He didn't hover, didn't ask if she was all right. He gave her what she needed, space without distance. She watched him, the line of his back, the tension still in his shoulders. His silence wasn't distant, it was considerate. She'd begun to understand that about him. He didn't speak unless the words mattered, didn't touch unless invited. And tonight, something in her was beginning to ask. He glanced at her once, eyes scanning, then back to his task. We're secure, he said, voice low. No active trace on the hull. Our signal's buried. She nodded. Then we're safe. For now. He stepped away from the console and sat across from her, pulling a small tin of med-sal from a drawer. Give me your hands, he said gently. She looked down. Only now did she realize her knuckles were raw, Fingers scraped from gripping her weapon, nails cracked. She extended them slowly, unsure. He took them without hesitation, setting the tin beside him and unscrewing the lid. The salve smelled faintly herbal, like winter air and rust. His touch was careful. No force, no hurry. Fingers gliding over hers, smoothing balm across torn skin. Each stroke slow, deliberate. His calloused thumb brushed against her pulse as he worked, grounding her in the present. "I didn't notice the pain until you touched me," she said softly. "That's usually how it works," he murmured. Silence settled between them like dust in low gravity. She studied his face, the cut along his cheekbone, the silvering at his temples, the heaviness under his eyes that no sleep could erase. He looked tired, but not weak. Worn, but unyielding. "Do you ever let anyone do this for you?" she asked. His lips quirked faintly. "Do what?" "Take care of you." He looked down at her hands. "I don't remember. Would you let me?" That made him pause. He looked at her then, really looked. Not with suspicion or surprise, but with something deeper. "Yes," he said, after a long moment. "If you wanted to." "I do." Saloon shifted slightly, lowering her legs and drawing closer until their knees touched. He didn't move, didn't lean in or away. "You never asked for anything," she said. "Not even thanks." "I didn't do it for thanks." "I know," she said. "That's what makes it harder to ignore." He let out a breath, more sigh than exhale. "I didn't know what to do with you when I found you. You were silent, staring, like you were already somewhere else. I figured if I touched you, you'd vanish." "I almost did," she said. "But you didn't chase. You just stayed. I didn't want to scare you." "You didn't," she said. "Not even once." Her hand reached up slowly, brushing his jaw. He closed his eyes at the contact. "I want to touch you now," she whispered. "Not because I feel I owe it, but because I want to." "You don't have to explain," he said, his voice hoarse. "I do," she said, "because no one ever asked me before, and I never got to say yes." She leaned in, slowly, waiting for resistance. There was none. Her lips brushed his tentative, warm. He returned the kiss with quiet intensity, like a man unlearning restraint, like he was afraid of breaking a moment too fragile to hold. It deepened naturally, slow, searching, a discovery rather than a rush. Her fingers slid into his hair, and he exhaled against her mouth. When they parted, she didn't pull away. She rested her forehead to his. "I don't need to be protected from you," she said. "I just need to know you'll still be here tomorrow." "I will," he said, "even if you change your mind." "I won't." They sat like that for a while, leaning into each other, letting breath replace words. The intimacy wasn't loud. It didn't demand. It simply existed. And in its quiet, Saloon realized something else. Her body, which had been a battlefield for so long, didn't feel like a weapon or a wound anymore. It felt like home. Later, she lay curled on the narrow bunk, Merrick beside her. His hand rested on her hip, light as breath, his presence anchoring her without caging her. Outside the viewport, stars drifted by in slow procession. Inside, she whispered, "What if they come back?" He didn't answer right away. "If they do," he said, "we fight. And if they don't, we keep going. Wherever you want. Even back to Kelthera, if that's where you need to go." She turned her face to him. "Not alone." "No," he said. "Not anymore." She reached for his hand and held it against her chest. Not to protect herself, but to remind him he wasn't alone either. And for the first time in years, sleep came without fear. Because for the first time, someone stayed. The Aegis drifted silently through the dark between stars, a lone thread of metal and breath in the endless black. Inside, time slowed. The alarms were off. The pursuit had faded. There were no more immediate dangers, no enemy ships on the scanners, no urgent decisions to make. There was only this room, these two people, this moment. Saloon stood near the edge of the bunk, bathed in dim gold from the wall panel's glow. Her skin shimmered like twilight on water, smooth, opalescent in places where light touched the curves of her arms, her collarbone, the gentle plane of her belly. The tension she wore like armor for so long had finally eased. And Merrick was still. He sat at the far edge of the room, back to the cool metal wall, watching her like she was a star-gone nova, something rare, once unreachable, now impossibly near. His chest rose and fell in slow rhythm, his hands loosely resting on his knees. He didn't speak. He didn't have to. Saloon crossed the room with unhurried steps, the weight of her own body suddenly foreign to her, alive in a way it hadn't been in years. She could feel every brush of air along her skin, every heartbeat like a drum beneath her ribs. She paused in front of him. He looked up at her, his eyes darker now, soft and stormy. "I want this," she said. Her voice didn't tremble. "But not because I need comfort." He nodded slowly. "Then why?" Her fingers slid along his jaw, tracing the rough line of a scar. "Because I'm ready to want." She stepped between his knees and leaned down, kissing him gently. It was warm, full, no longer exploratory. This was not a question. It was an answer. He kissed her back, hands coming up, resting lightly on her hips. But he didn't pull, didn't press. He held her like he was terrified she might vanish again. She pulled back just slightly, her breath brushing his lips. "Lie down." He blinked once, surprised, but did as she asked. Silent, trusting. Saloon straddled his hips, her knees pressing into the mattress on either side. The heat between them sparked like static, blooming beneath her skin. She leaned forward, bracing herself with her hands against his chest. Marek's hands instinctively went to her thighs, thumbs grazing the skin just beneath the curve of her hips. His breath had gone shallow. "You okay?" she asked, her voice low. He nodded. "You?" Her eyes glittered in the soft light. "Better than okay." She moved against him, slow, deliberate, letting him feel the full weight of her. No shame, no hesitation. Her breath hitched as heat flared where their bodies touched. She watched his face as she shifted her hips. His eyes fluttered closed for a moment, a sound catching in his throat, a low, helpless groan that made something deep inside her tighten. "Open your eyes," she whispered. He did. She leaned down again, kissing him with more force now, more intention. Her hair fell around them like a veil, cool and silken against his face. His hands gripped her waist, then slid up her back, tracing the curve of her spine as if trying to memorize her inch by inch. And then she began to move, slowly, curiously, like learning a new language with her body. Her breath caught, then escaped, a sound so soft it almost startled her. Pleasure, real pleasure. Her body moved again, slower this time, hips circling. Another gasp escaped her lips, but this one she didn't silence. Marek's hands clenched. "Saloon." She looked down, breathing hard. "Don't stop me." "Never." She moved again, this time letting herself ride the wave that had been growing inside her. Years of silence, restraint, of being taken. This was not that. This was hers. She quickened her rhythm, just slightly, just enough to hear him groan again beneath her. His hips lifted instinctively to meet her, but he let her lead. His head fell back against the pillow, throat exposed, jaw tense. She leaned forward and pressed her mouth to his neck, her breath hot, her moans quiet and broken between kisses. He murmured her name. Once, twice, a reverent prayer, and she felt herself unraveling, not in fear, not in pain, but in power. Her body shook as she neared the edge, her moans growing louder, more urgent. And Marek, he held her hips steady, rising to meet her, voice hoarse, grounding her with every movement. Then she came, body trembling, voice raw with release. A cry half strangled in her throat. She didn't try to hide it, and through the haze of it, she realized she was laughing. Not loud, not hysterical, just soft, joyful, disbelieving. Marek looked up, dazed, sweat beading along his temple. "What?" "I didn't think I'd ever make those sounds again," she whispered. He reached up, brushing hair from her cheek. "You did." She collapsed onto his chest, still breathing hard, her body slick with warmth, her limbs loose and heavy. Marek wrapped his arms around her and held her close, his mouth against her hair. They didn't speak for a while. The room was full of heartbeats. Finally, he said, "That was..." She smiled into his skin. "Mine." "Yes," he said, "and perfect." She propped herself up on one elbow, looking down at him. "I don't want this to be just one night. He reached for her face, thumb brushing her lower lip. It won't be. She kissed him again, softer now, lingering. I want more, she said. But not just this. I want to build something. With you. He nodded. Then we will. Saloon rested her head back on his chest, the steady rhythm of his heart beneath her ear. And for the first time in a long, long time, she didn't feel hunted. She didn't feel broken. She felt whole, wanted, and deeply, undeniably alive. They fell asleep like that, still tangled together, skin warm, breath synced. And in the deep silence of the Aegis, beneath the stars that once bore witness to her captivity, Saloon finally dreamed. Of oceans, of wind, of arms that didn't bind her, but caught her, of a future, when she could finally touch. The stars outside were slower now, or maybe it only felt that way. Time no longer measured itself by fear, or by hunger, or by what hurt. It moved differently here, in the quiet cradle of the Aegis, where two souls finally stopped surviving and began something else entirely. Saloon stirred against Marek's chest, her breath warm where her cheek pressed against his skin. One leg remained draped across his thigh, her hand splayed lazily over his heart, as if it were a compass she was still learning to follow. His arm curled protectively around her back, holding her close even in sleep. It had taken her hours to fall asleep, even after they'd made love. Not from restlessness, but from wonder. She'd never fallen asleep like that before, bare, spent, safe. The walls of the ship had held them, but his body had been the first real shelter she'd ever known. Now, waking came slowly, gently. Her eyes opened, not from fear or noise, but because she wanted to see him. He was already awake, watching her. His thumb traced slow arcs along her spine. You didn't run, he said, voice low, gravelly. She smiled. I didn't want to. His expression softened. Good. There were no other words needed for a long moment. Their body spoke for them, relaxed, warm, still tangled from the night before. She sat up slightly, drawing the thin sheet with her, and looked around the room. It felt different now, like something sacred had happened here. Not dramatic, just real. I've never woken up in someone's arms before, she said. Not like this. Not by choice. He looked up at her from the pillow, gaze steady. Then I'm honored to be the first. She reached down, brushed a hand over his hair, her fingers pausing at the nape of his neck. It felt like something began last night. It did, he said. You. That made her pause. Her throat tightened, but she didn't pull away. I didn't know it could be like that, she whispered. I thought that part of me had died, or been stolen. It wasn't, Marek said, sitting up now. They only buried it. You dug it out. Her eyes met his. With your help. He kissed her then, slow, deep, like sealing a promise. When they pulled apart, he rested his forehead against hers. What now? She exhaled, the first breath of something that sounded like certainty. Kelthera, she said. I want to see it again, even if there's nothing left. He nodded. We'll set course. It's dangerous territory now, but we'll keep low. She smiled faintly. You say that like you haven't been dancing with danger your entire life. I've been dancing alone, he said. That's not the same. She traced her fingers down his chest, pausing over an old scar. Not anymore. He caught her hand in his, held it there. Do you remember the first time I touched you? Yes, she said. You didn't touch me like I was breakable. You touched me like you were afraid you'd break. He nodded. I was. Still am. Don't be, she said, brushing her lips against his jaw. You don't need to hold me like glass. I won't shatter. Not glass, he murmured. Fire. She smiled against his skin. Then stay close. I burn warmer with you. They rose together, dressing slowly, comfortably, like two people who no longer feared being seen. The intimacy of their morning was unspoken, but everywhere. In how she reached for his shirt instead of hers, in how he caught her wrist and kissed it before releasing her. They walked to the bridge in silence, side by side. As the console lit up, Saloon moved to the comms terminal. The stars outside were turning. The system ahead pulsed with familiar, painful coordinates. Kelthera. Home. Memory. Ruin. She touched the interface with steady fingers. Shall we? She asked. He glanced at her, then activated the helm. Course locked. We'll be in orbit in 4 days. For days. For days until she faced what she thought she'd never survive. And this time, she wouldn't be chained, or caged, or mute. She'd walk the soil again, not as a survivor, but as the last voice of her people. And she would speak. She looked over at Merrick, the man who had waited, the man who never reached too soon, the man who gave without taking. She reached out, took his hand in hers. I thought desire would feel like losing control, she said quietly. But last night, it felt like choosing freedom. You were never mine, he said. You were just finally free to choose me. And she had. And she would again, and again, and again. Outside, the stars turned. But inside the aegis, everything had stopped spinning. They had found gravity. Not in war, not in pain, not in the places they'd fled from, but in each other, where fire met silence, where want met patience, where love was not owed, but offered, and accepted, freely. The aegis broke through the clouds like a memory surfacing from deep water. From the cockpit window, the sky over Kelthera was pale and endless, washed in the soft gold of an early morning sun. Wisps of cloud scattered beneath them, and just beyond, the planet stretched wide in blue and green, a place once lost, now real. Saloon stood behind Merrick at the control panel, her hand resting lightly on his shoulder. She hadn't spoken in 10 minutes, not since the first curve of her homeworld came into view. Her eyes glistened, not with fear, with awe. Beneath them, ocean met land in sweeping ribbons of sapphire and forest. The coastline was familiar, and yet different. The cliffs where her people once carved stone halls into the mountains still stood, though worn. The white domes of the southern temples had collapsed in places. Nature had taken back what war had tried to erase. It was wounded, but not gone. Skin shows no syndic signal, Merrick said quietly. No ships, no activity. It's clear. Saloon exhaled long, trembling. I thought I'd never see it again. He turned to her. Do you want to go down? She nodded, slowly. More than anything. He reached out and took her hand. Then let's go home. The shuttle detached from the aegis with a quiet hiss and descended through the atmosphere. Wind brushed the wings, gentle currents guiding them toward the cliffs above the sea, where Saloon remembered playing as a child, barefoot, long before fear learned her name. When the shuttle touched down on a moss-covered landing pad, time stopped. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then Saloon opened the hatch, and a rush of warm, salt-sweet air filled the cabin. The scent of old forests, ocean wind, earth not touched by blood or metal. She stepped out first, barefoot. The ground was soft. Wild grass had pushed through every crack of the platform. Vines curled around shattered railings. Nature had not only survived, it had healed in ways her kind hadn't been allowed to. Merrick followed her out, his boots crunching lightly behind her. But he didn't speak. He simply watched her. Saloon stood still for a long moment. Then she walked forward, step by step, until she reached the edge of the cliff, where the sea opened wide before her. Waves crashed against rocks below. Birds circled in the air above. And somewhere far inland, she swore she could hear the wind singing through the remains of the old temples. I was taken from here, she said, voice barely above the breeze. From this very place. I remember the sound of the engines, the color of the sky. I was 15. Merrick moved to stand beside her. I thought this land forgot me, she continued. But it didn't. She turned slowly toward him. I used to dream of coming back here, but in those dreams, I was still a girl, still afraid, still silent. She stepped closer. But today, I came back as a woman who survived, a woman who chose, who loved. He reached for her, fingers brushing hers. And this time, she laced her fingers through his. I want to bury who I was, she said softly. Right here, and build someone new. Then I'll help you, Merrick said. But not to fix you, just to walk beside you. Saloon leaned forward and rested her forehead against his. They stood there, wrapped in the wind, the sea stretching infinite around them. A new world, a second chance. That night, they made a fire near the old cliff's edge, beneath the same stars that once watched her be stolen. Now, they watched her return. Saloon sat beside Merrick, wrapped in a woven shawl made from the remains of a temple tapestry they'd found in the ruins. its symbol faded, but still glowing faintly with ancestral energy. She rested her head on his shoulder. "I think we could live here," she said. "We can. No syndic, no orders, just wind and stars. And each other." She turned toward him, cupped his face, and kissed him. Not urgently, not from relief, but with the kind of quiet affection that only freedom can give. They didn't need to run anymore. Didn't need to fight. The battle had ended the moment her feet touched her homeland again. Not as a prisoner, but as a woman returned. And in that, there was peace. Real peace. Hard-earned, unbreakable, and finally hers.